As you watch the following movie segments, relate them to what you are about to learn in the presentation that you hear. Violence Perceptions and Cultural Influences by Tyler Cochran. Violence is pervasive in societies worldwide, and our perception of it is influenced by our unique cultural lens and Western social orders. In the United States, for example, violence is everywhere. You see it on the streets of major cities and on your favorite afternoon television program. You are a witness to our society's violence whenever you go to the movies or a boxing match. In this presentation, I want to explore where violence is and why it is so appealing in our media. Negative stimulus on the brain can be experienced as pleasure. An example is when a bee stings a person on the finger. That information travels through the neuron pathways and makes its way to the thalamus, which is located near the base of the brain. The thalamus virtually copies the information and sends it to the oblongata and the cortex regions of the brain. The oblongata makes a rather primal decision, quick and harsh. When the bee stings the finger, the oblongata says, "Get your hand away from that bee!" Consequently, the hand jerks back. About a fourth of a second later, the cortex receives the information and makes a much more complex and rational solution to the problem. In the bee scenario, that equals, "Now might be a good time to put my gloves on." The cortex region of the brain is also the part of the brain that gives the sensation of pleasure. As a person is stung multiple times, their cortex can become desensitized to that sensation and find it pleasurable. As a person experiences a violent movie, an initial reaction might be extreme revulsion, but the cortex can override that response with feelings that invoke pleasure. If this happens, violence can be viewed as acceptable or even funny. Everywhere in our media there is violence. The more obvious examples would be, of course, action and horror movies. Violence also appears in many television shows and series, with Law & Order and CSI being prime examples. Even the average cartoon has a surprising amount of violence, in part because violence is also quite prevalent in comedy. Dating back to the Three Stooges, slapstick comedy has been a favorite of many Americans. The persons of a given region determine what that culture's outlook on an issue may be. But in turn, the culture of that very same region influences what the people believe. As people begin to accept violence, so the cultural changes to let violence thrive. Comic violence, I think, is one of the easiest ways of desensitizing one's brain to the ill effects violence causes. Still, some things are just not funny. In order for something to be funny, according to Dorian Moran and Michael Apter, people need to maintain emotional distance. They need to feel that they are in a secure environment and know what has happened is a fictional act and that it's in the past. But once the humor comes across, the brain invites it openly for the promise of a lifted mood. But with the humor comes the violence, and with it the desensitization of the brain. Desensitization to violence through media makes the viewer less outraged at violence in the actual world and more likely to engage in drug and gang activities. Both of these are strong in the culture that we live in. Through this process, we learn that all violence in our media, whether in horror movies or cartoons, carries its own price on our society. Just as marijuana can be a gateway drug to methamphetamine and cocaine, violent humor can lead to an interest in more graphic movies and television programs. Zillman, in The Psychology of the Appeal of Portrayals of Violence, states that the thrill people receive from viewing violence diminishes over repeated exposure, a sort of violent habituation or addiction. Drug addicts talk about chasing the high. Violence addicts do, in essence, the same thing when they watch more and more graphic and violent material. In some cases, this need for more can cross over into the real world and lead to assaults, rapes, and even murders. Looking at all the violence that we instill into our children from an early age with cartoons, not malicious in nature, but desensitizing nonetheless, it looks like our society will continue to be one that accepts violence. If our children see violence from such a very young age to be acceptable, then odds are their opinions will not change for the rest of their lives. As Gammons put it,
"We are all compelled to witness man's capacity for cruelty. We are shocked, but perversely satisfied to see that which is meant to stay inside come out into the light."
Violence is strong in our society. It influences our culture and all the people therein. Comedic violence can lead people over the line of fiction into real life, searching for a high. Even what may seem harmless or innocent is still desensitizing and leads to a high interest in graphic content. Unless some strong unknown factor influences our culture, violence will continue to be a driving force in the American media.